Alan, the way this works is that someone talks and you don't talk.
You got it.
Seems to be an ongoing theme. All right. Anyway.
I think so.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to IrenaCast, the weekly podcast dedicated to conversations on faith and culture. We are your hosts. I'm Jeff.
I'm Alan.
And I'm... I was going to say Mona, but I couldn't do it. I'm not a good liar.
That's true, Alan. You really aren't a good liar.
I was just trying to throw you off. Apparently it worked.
It did work. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this week. If you're confused by that, that was all planned, by the way, because we've been talking about gender. We wanted to just mix it up and throw you for a loop. But
no, that wasn't planned.
Well, I was trying to mess with Alan because earlier when we were talking about recording today, he demanded that Jeff and I tell him a joke. Like, not just asked, he said, tell me a joke. I demand a joke. And we were like, what the heck? You can't just demand a joke.
Yes, it was our responsibility for creating Alan's mood.
And then he told me to be happy. And then by the time this conversation was over, I was just pissed. So that's what happened just now.
So now you have a little window into our pre-production meetings. We really don't get anything done, but demanding things of one another.
I think I'm just grumpy because I'm not in the woods anymore. I was camping last weekend and I got a hammock specifically for the occasion. And so I put the hammock up underneath the trees and I put a sleeping bag inside the hammock. And I meant to read a book, but instead I fell asleep and had the best nap of my life for like 2 hours, passed out. I woke up like covered in leaves and tiny caterpillars, but I didn't even care. But it did occur to me to wonder why I had gone so long in my life without owning a hammock. Everyone should own a hammock. I got a hammock for $25 on Amazon, and it was the best decision I've ever made. And now it's raining and I can't take it outside, so I'm grumpy.
All right. Oh, today's conversation. What? Go ahead.
I was just going to say this past weekend we hung out, but if there's not enough time for that, we could just skip it.
There's no time for you, Alan.
No time.
There's no time for you. Yeah. So while Mona was camping and getting covered in leaves and bugs, we were in my home, for Memorial Day weekend, last weekend, hanging out, had a barbecue. Alan had a good time.
Jeff barbecued 6 tri-tip. That's like
wait, you have to explain what a tri-tip is.
Yeah, that's a
tri-tip is like a loaf of meat. It's like a
you just described it awful.
It's so not like, meat loaf, however.
No,
it's a cut of beef. It's a certain
really
specific
big
cut of beef. Mm-hmm. And each one weighs about, 20 pounds? So if you barbecued 6, you were barbecuing...
I don't know if it was 20
like
pounds.
5 or 6, maybe.
More like 5 or 6
pounds.
Oh,
okay. All right.
But that's it tastes like there's so much quality packed into such a small amount of space. It feels like you ate 20 pounds worth of meat, even though you only ate 6.
That's a lot of meat. So what did you guys couldn't possibly have eaten it all in one sitting?
No. Well, we had a barbecue.
He also made like 40 jalapeno poppers or something.
Oh my God. That sounds really good. How do you make those?
You hollow out a jalapeno and then you fill it full of cream cheese and wrap it in bacon and grill it.
What?
It is pretty good.
It is pretty good. Although I had a conversation with someone. I had been doing those for a long time because when I was a youth pastor, I had a student show me how to do those. And now every time I barbecue, I have to do them because they're amazing and delicious. So with these, I'm sitting there and I'm talking to, because this is part of a barbecue / home group meeting that we were having. And for years, I've been doing these poppers. And I take a spoon and fill it with the cream cheese. And recently, having children, I could use a baby spoon, and it worked even better. So I was really excited about this new method with the baby spoon. And then this lady is like, why don't you just put the cream cheese in a piping bag? And I stopped great. And I was like, I feel like the biggest idiot in the history of the world because that's brilliant and easy and very practical on how to fill those things. And
but piping bags are not in most people's day-to-day lives.
But they are in mine. I use them for everything. I have a piping bag. I'll use like a zip top bag, like all of these things. And I can't believe, in fact, if I think back, I'm pretty sure that there was one point where I piped something into something else while I was preparing jalapeno poppers and didn't make the connection. And it was
you idiot. I'm just kidding.
Agreed.
Well, all I can think about right now is a great memory from childhood. Sorry, can I just say one more anecdote and tidbit? You'll get a kick out of this. I'm remembering this wonderful time when my younger sister and we had just seen The Lion King. and we were singing all the songs that we could remember. And she was like 5 years old or something. And all of a sudden she goes, jalapenos, peppers on your pizza. It was so cute. She was only 5.
Knowing that she was 5 years old makes it even cuter.
Right?
Like, that's pretty adorable. I can't wait for the day where my daughters sing about jalapeno on their pizza.
They'll do it sooner than you even realize.
They're already too freaking cute, so I don't know how much I can take.
This last weekend we learned a new vocab word from them. We're trying to figure out what it means, but they just say it randomly. The word is bagiga, and we're not sure what it means, but they say it so often that you feel like you should know.
What's the context?
It's everything.
Everything.
They'll point at everything in random places.
They'll both started saying it. That's the weird.
They're getting into that
and I have been
phase.
saying bagiga lately.
Yeah, and they're getting into that
twin word.
phase now where when my wife's at work and it starts to get dark and I'm with the girls, one of my daughters, she'll start pointing at blank areas of the room and like saying hi.
It's creepy.
Yeah, it is creepy. It's starting to get to that place where I'm like, are you really talking to something that you see, or are you just, I don't.
God.
It's kind of starting to freak me out. Anyway.
Kids are fun.
Anyway, let's on that note, just some new news that we have as far as the podcast is concerned. We now have a Google Plus page, so go check us out at google.com.
What is Google Plus?
I don't really know.
Is that a thing that people use?
I know that we're supposed to have a page according to.
Okay.
So we have one.
If you were a Google
Google's going to
purist,
dock us for making fun of it.
you can now. Yeah, right.
Sorry.
And then we also have a new feature that we've added to our website, irenicast.com. If you go to irenicast.com/feedback, you can leave us a voice message that, if it is good and compelling enough, may even make the show one day. So if you would like to voice a question to the podcast, you can go to irenicast.com/feedback.
Wait
the
a
higher
minute.
quality.
I want to do this. How does this work? This is new news to me.
Go to the website, and then there's a little button that says record your thing here, and you'll see it in the feedback section, and record. And the higher quality,
awesome.
the higher quality your voice, the higher chance you have of getting on. So don't use your silly little laptop mic because it sounds awful. Just plug a little mic in there. Ask us a question. Give a shout out. Whatever
Jeff
you'd
is
like.
such a production
I know.
snob.
I am. Well, I'm just thinking of everyone listening. You don't want to hear.
Seriously though, this
crappy
is like
audio.
high tech. I didn't even know you could do this.
That's cool.
The file will be
Editing.
emailed to my email, and I can edit it into the show if you are compelling. So that's a challenge to you listeners. Wow.
8 episodes ago, we talked about
Tell us a
people
joke.
recording. I was gonna say record yourself breathing from that one episode we did, but that's even better.
No,
Tell us a joke.
Don't
Record
record
a joke
yourself
and send it to
breathing.
me.
Someone's going to do that now that you brought it to
I
their
know.
attention. And I have to listen to that.
It was funny.
All
I
right.
guess if we get a bunch of them, we could do some sort of breathing mashup.
Mm-hmm.
We could.
That's
All right.
See if you recognize your breathing on our show.
We could just a whole episode. Guess who's breathing? See if we can have some special breathing guests.
Oh.
All right. Anyway, this week we are continuing our discussions on gender and sexuality, and we hope that so far you've enjoyed that. So on the other side of the music, we're going to be talking this week about homosexuality and Christianity. So stay tuned. So this week, homosexuality and Christianity. Not a very controversial topic. I really don't even understand why we're really talking about this. It's
Drops
not.
mic, goes home.
I know, right? That's it. Anyway,
Obviously, nobody disagrees about this topic, right?
obviously,
There is
Obviously.
there is a uniform Christian voice, and everybody agrees.
I agree.
Right.
I don't know what we're agreeing on, but I agree.
All right. So on the other side of the music, Jesus. All right. So obviously, this is a pretty controversial subject, especially within the church. So we figured, as part of a series on gender and sexuality, we would be remiss not to begin a conversation about sexuality with starting about homosexuality, because that seems to be the predominant, I guess, alternative. And I'm putting air quotes in the air. Alternative sexuality that's most commonly talked about right now. So we're going to kind of let this conversation flow and see where it goes, but we definitely have to address the elephant in the room, and we will turn to our resident Bible scholar to start the conversation, Alan.
Mona.
I thought you were going to say our resident elephant.
Yeah, the idea that the Bible speaks to homosexuality is what's caused for a lot of people these disagreements. There are people in political circles, and I just read about Ireland just passed the universal law that allows gay marriage, and the Catholic Church. That's a traditionally Catholic place, and they're talking about what they're going to do next and how they're supposed to interact with that. And obviously, in the United States, it's a pretty hotly debated topic. But for most people, it comes back down to they believe the Bible condemns homosexuality, so they're trying to live faithfully to what God has said and how God has created human beings. For this conversation, that's where it stops and ends, I would say, for a large majority of people.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm thinking about Ireland too, Alan, as you're talking, because not only does the Bible have some, I think there are 9 verses dealing with homosexuality supposedly in the Bible, but a lot of religious leaders have come out really strongly. And Pope Francis is known for being pretty progressive as a pope. I'm thinking Ireland is a predominantly Catholic country and stuff, but a lot of people are saying that Ireland is becoming post-Catholic because Pope Francis in particular has very strong words about gender and sexuality and about homosexual people or gay people. As we learned in the interview with Nathan last week, it's not really considered culturally, like politically correct to call people homosexuals anymore. That's kind of has a derogatory flavor. So we say gay people or LGBTQIA people. But it's really interesting. You know, it's interesting that we could have a pope that comes out pro-science in a lot of ways, but still has really some people, and I would think really archaic views about gender and sexuality that are rooted in really ancient cleanliness codes. So,
well, for the Catholic faith, it really does go back to like 1968 when they were deciding certain documents, and the church put out the idea of natural law that sex should be marital and unitive and procreative, and the fact that gay marriage doesn't procreate, it doesn't create life. That kind of challenges the entire idea of what sex is created for them. But I would say for most non-Catholic Christians, like in the United States, especially, the idea of sex is only okay when it creates life is not even a concept like in their in our vocabulary.
Yeah, a lot of Christians like don't have problems with birth control, for example. Okay,
yeah,
but
exactly.
I do want to say that those views on sexuality and sex like go back way before the Vatican Council in 1968. But you're absolutely right. That is that's the official doctrine of the church, the Catholic Church,
so
as
that's
far
part
as we
of the
understand.
reason. Yeah, so that's part of the reason why the Pope is very attached to that. But so setting that aside, the Bible does it. You said it references homosexuality 9 times, and I would like to interject some air quotes of my own. I would like to say homosexuality. The fact that the Bible addresses it is not necessarily cut and dry as we think it is. Like to say that the Bible addresses homosexuality is to smooth over a lot of historical context, and to just assume that what we speak about when we say homosexuality is what the authors of texts in the Bible said when they spoke of sexuality or homosexuality.
That's a good point. Can you say more?
Yeah. Okay. So obviously there's different ways to translate the words and the ideas behind what homosexual meant to people who were writing the Bible. But the idea that a person was a homosexual, that a human being had a certain sexuality that was not the norm, is actually a modern concept. These concepts weren't even in the Bible whatsoever. You didn't have people who were seen as a homosexual that would get married to another homosexual, for instance. Like homosexual committed relationships and the idea that people can have that sexuality was not around in the world that the Bible was written in. So to assume that those writings are talking about what we're talking about skips over the difference between those two worlds.
I would also say it's a lot of the things that the Bible verses people quote are from like Levitical law, you know, are saying when a man lays with another man, it is an abomination. And then just verses later, sometimes when that's the same chapter, the same word abomination is also used for eating shellfish, for example. You might have seen arguments like this on social media or kind of in the broader media. But what people don't often talk about is that as the nation of Israel was emerging as a people, it was really important in order to preserve their culture to separate and differentiate themselves from their neighbors, from people around them, to say this is what makes us us because we follow Yahweh and we are following purity rituals and moral codes in order to preserve our cultural identity. So things like not eating shellfish, cleanliness laws, not eating hoofed animals and things like that, part of cultural identity. Nowadays, we know that there's no scientific reason not to eat shellfish, but back then it was seen as cleanliness, as culturally just a thing that you don't do because it was believed religiously and in a kind of proto-scientific sense to not be healthy for you. And Yahweh wants Yahweh's people to be healthy. So
my favorite example of that is the mixing of fibers, right? You're not supposed to mix different fibers and cloth together.
Yeah.
So our clothes are abominations according to Levitical law.
Yeah, I mean, we don't. So if you see the bans against certain types of sexuality and, for example, bans against, menstruating women working, and having to sit inside a tent for 5 days or whatever, if you see all of this as a cultural identity that's protecting a people from the identities of outsiders, it really kind of casts all of that for me in a different light. And when I considered that, alongside the idea that the Bible doesn't speak out against a host of sexual or marriage practices that today we consider incredibly harmful and barbaric, like, for example, selling your children into marriage in order to gain goats or whatever. A lot of people have very strong feelings around polygamy, have owning slaves and considering the slave sexual property. The Bible, by and large, does not speak out against those things. So to say that we're going to hold on to these really ancient concepts of sexuality and marriage because the Bible says we shouldn't do it, but ignore the fact that the Bible condones a lot of things that we consider today very harmful. Like, that's a really big double standard that a lot of people are not willing to face.
Yeah. And even if we look at obviously the big story that's associated with homosexuality, Sodom and Gomorrah, how that became a passage about homosexuality is really disingenuous, even from a literal interpretation of the Bible, if you're taking that. I mean, even in Ezekiel 16, I think it's Ezekiel 16:49 or something like that, and we can put it in the show notes. It says specifically that the guilt of Sodom was the fact that they had arrogance and abundant food and didn't care for the poor and the needy, that is why they were judged, like even from a literal standpoint. So this, and we talk a lot about the idea of how we look at the Bible and stuff like that back in, I think it's episode 4. So if you want to check that out and get a more holistic understanding of kind of what we're talking about. But yeah, like we can't culturally remove ourselves from when it was written and then pick and choose what we're going to hold on to and what we're not going to hold on to.
Yeah.
So I think the main underlying thing is that cultures change from one to another, and they have norms that each culture holds on to, different cultural mores. And we assess them in light of the overall biblical principles, but we look at the cultural norms that are in the Bible themselves and evaluate those in light of the whole message of the Bible as well. The fact that polygamy was not condemned by the Bible, we look at that and we look at the whole message of the Bible, and some people would choose to condemn polygamy, not because they're moving away from the culture of the Bible, but they're using their ideas that they get from the Bible to condemn that practice. And what you're saying is really interesting. I think it's very clear in the Bible, for instance, slaves should not work to liberate themselves from slavery. Right?
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, there's a commandment. There's a more clear New Testament commandment in my mind to submit to slavery than not to practice homosexuality. So basically, we're taking biblical principles and morals that we have from the whole text, the life of Jesus, the whole narrative, the direction of the Bible, and we're looking at those cultural concepts, and we're actually saying, hey, guess what? Slavery is actually immoral. We don't subscribe to that. And so when we look at sexuality, it's kind of the same way. There's a way that sexuality was expressed in Roman culture and in Paul's time or New Testament writers' time, and we're using biblical principles to turn back and reflect on those cultural practices and to see if those are things that we need to adjust for our own time. And that's something that everybody does. I mean, like you've probably done it for slavery. You belong to a context where we've said slavery is wrong, but that's really moving away from the way the church lived, right? The early church, the Church of Acts and the New Testament.
Yeah.
But it's something that we all do.
It is, yeah. And I think there are times that we move away from the biblical visions of morality on purpose and sometimes not on purpose. It's just kind of cultural shifts so much over time that to consider that you could A, have slaves and B, consider them your sexual property is so far beyond our today vision of morality that we wouldn't even consider making an argument for it. We've moved away from it permanently, you know? I mean, hopefully permanently. But it's interesting if you really dig around, especially in Paul's writings, there is not a complete ban against a variety of sexual behavior. What there is a ban on is crossing property boundaries. And I want to give an example. In 1 Corinthians 5:1, Paul's saying it's actually been reported among you that there's sexual immorality, such as not even the pagans or the Gentiles tolerate. And in the Greek, it says, hoste gunaika tina tu patros ekein. So as one of you has the wife of their father. And gunaika could be translated woman or wife. But in this case, it says a woman. So it's a woman. So it's probably a female slave. So one of you is sleeping with the female slave of your father. And this word of sexual immorality they're using in this phrase is called porneia, which is typically associated with prostitution or something really outlandishly outside the boundaries, the cultural boundaries, right? Porneia, nobody's really sure what it means, but this is the closest we think we have. What I mean to say by this is that Paul is offended that somebody in the congregation is not sleeping outside with someone outside marriage. He's offended that someone is crossing a cultural boundary and taking advantage of the property of their kin. Do you see the difference? One is a property argument and one's a moral argument. I don't know if that's super clear, but what I mean to say is that there is not a ban in scripture about sexuality outside of marriage that a lot of people say there is. And there's not a ban against homosexuality that a lot of people say there is. And there's actually a pretty good argument to make that the Bible doesn't really talk about loving, consensual adult relationships between two people of the same sex. The Bible just doesn't really address that. A lot of times when it does address it, it's talking about some form of domination or cultural identity.
So if we could actually just focus in on that one point, this one point opens up this entire topic for me. You make a good point, Mona, that when it's talking about sexuality, the concept of consenting adult homosexual committed relationships doesn't exist for them. You talked before about property and those kinds of things, especially in these references to homosexuality. The only homosexuality that we know of that existed for Paul in his time was slave sex. Some people say that there was temple prostitution. Some people point to the Greek idea of pederasty, where you have sodomizing young boys to make them into men. But the Romans really weren't into that. That's an older thing. But there's no concept of, hey, I am a homosexual person. I'm in a homosexual relationship with another person in a holistic way. All there is for Paul that he can even possibly address is what he sees. He can't talk about what doesn't exist in the culture. This is actually super interesting. So N.T. Wright has gone publicly saying that there was consenting homosexual relationships during Paul's time, because he realizes if there wasn't, then Paul necessarily couldn't talk to it. So he makes the case that if you look in Plato's Symposium, you can see one example of homosexual relationships. And if you look at Nero's life, you can see another example of homosexual relationships. These are two things he's thrown out there in his commentary on Romans and in other places. But what N.T. Wright doesn't tell you, and I love N.T. Wright, he's a great guy. I've read his books and they're very integral for me. But Plato's Symposium was written 400 years before the New Testament was penned. And Nero was like an insane person. And the idea that he married a young boy is actually super crazy to the Romans, because it wasn't something that was commonly done. He like marries all these different people, and then it's pretty graphic, but he castrates a young boy and gets married to him. So to say that there was like gay marriage in the time of Paul is just absolutely crazy. You either have to go 400 years before to find any sort of reference to some sort of homosexual relationship, or you have to point to the crazy emperor dictator who performs these unspeakable acts on people and say, oh, that's an example of gay marriage, but it's just not there. And so when we talk about in our culture, how are we to approach gay marriage now that we know people, they can have a sexuality that is not heterosexual, like a homosexual sexuality? How do we approach those people? Because we know that this exists and this is a thing. We are engaging that for the first time in a real way, as opposed to the culture that the Bible was written in.
Yeah, and some people will claim that homosexuality didn't exist. Like there weren't gay people who were biologically predisposed to be attracted to people of their own gender or other, other genders that are not traditionally considered mainstream. What I mean to say is that there is evidence, there's overwhelming evidence that there have always been gay people in every culture, always, and I think that's really important to let sink in because it's not even likely. It is an absolute fact that there were gay people in ancient Israel. There have been gay people from the beginning of time. And I think like there's some cultures even today, I want to say North Korea and Saudi Arabia have made claims that they don't have gay people in their country. Things like this, right? What I mean to say in evoking this history is that it has only been in recent times that people who are predisposed genetically to be attracted to the same gender have had immense violence done against them and have had to stay silent. It's not that they have not been with us throughout time. It's that they've been silenced throughout time. And until very recently, there's been no way to live publicly into these sorts of roles, right? And to have that as part of your identity. And I'm thinking in particular of the Stonewall riots of the 1960s. Not a lot of people know that the LGBTQ communities had their own civil rights movement that was kind of centered in Greenwich Village in New York at the Stonewall Inn. And that's a really interesting story if you want to go read it. But it's people finally standing up and saying, I'm really sick and tired of being oppressed. I want a place in society, even if it's a small corner. Well, people will leave me alone and let me be. That vision's grown from there. But I think, and it's interesting that I've met a lot of gay people who find liberation in the Bible as a basis for why they want that space in society. That God made them beautiful, and they should be allowed to exist and love who they want to love as long as they're not hurting anybody.
And the New Testament's open to inclusion. That's what the New Testament is like built upon, is the idea that outsiders have been included into the community. And if there is a portion of our population who has been, like you said, silenced or underrepresented or not able to speak, and they've been even oppressed, that opening up our community to people who don't have inclusion is what the New Testament is about.
I think the consistent narrative throughout Scripture, obviously isolated if we strip some of the cultural stuff away, is this idea of those that are voiceless, the orphan, the widow, part of that idea of inclusion and opening up and no more designations between you're in and you're out. We're all in. We're all part of this community. And I think what's happened is a lot of the rhetoric that's used by people that are against a certain sexuality, that rhetoric heightens that divide. It creates an in and it creates an out, especially when, and this really bothers me, especially when they start comparing, saying a homosexual in a committed relationship or marriage, depending upon the state that they're in, is no different from a pedophile. Or,
oh God,
you know what I mean? Yeah, like that rhetoric that creates that disgusting divide between, well, if you're homosexual, you probably like little boys or little girls, and it's just,
there's a lot of fear of what people don't know.
Absolutely, the whole slippery
honestly,
slope
if
stuff.
nobody has friends who are gay or openly gay, and they themselves don't experience that, it's hard to comprehend what you don't know. And if you don't personally know people, you go to those places of fear and you start acting out like that. So I can see why people do that. And it is frustrating.
It's so funny, though, that psychologists today, for example, the Kinsey scale, developed by Alfred Kinsey in 1948. Psychologists, the American Psychological Association, and a lot of these psychological associations around the world have come to a near consensus that sexuality is on a spectrum, and the way that people are attracted to others is on a spectrum. And so most of us have had thoughts of same-sex attraction at least once or twice, if not a lot more. In fact, most people statistically are pretty close to the middle of that spectrum. So if you put like homosexual, like attracted to same sex, attracted to different sex on the other side, so one side and the other, most of us land in the middle. So most of us have at least a partial same-sex attraction. And I think because it's been so maligned and so taught that it is inherently dirty, that a lot of people spend their lives warring against that and feeling incredibly ashamed and dirty for what psychologists say is just DNA. It's just the way we're made, and people spend years spinning webs of theology trying to understand how God could create most of us statistically with this quote unquote misaligned sexuality and then have to fight against it our whole lives. So I think that's the grand irony to me, is that the majority of the people out there would probably be LGBTQIA in some fashion.
I think it's important to say that not only have people been made to feel quote unquote, dirty for having homosexual thoughts, but even heterosexual thoughts. Within the context, obviously within the context, outside of the context of marriage, but even in times that within the context of marriage, the rhetoric that's used and the rules that are applied,
That's kind of undergirding this whole thing, making sex so taboo that it's difficult to even engage. And
yeah, and it's tough because I've talked to some friends lately or some family members who are definitely on the more conservative side of the spectrum, and they they're wrestling with the gay question, so it's been called, in church in particular. And recently I had an interesting conversation where someone in my life was like, hey, I'm actually becoming more open to gay people in the church, and I don't want to think it's completely like the worst sin ever, but God can forgive sins and God can change people, and that we should invite them into our communities. And I think I'm really, really uncomfortable, borderline afraid for that, for evangelicals becoming a little bit more tolerant so as to invite gay people in and make them feel really safe and wait till their defenses come down and then say, oh, by the way, God wants to change you and there's hope for you, brother or sister, or whoever. And I think
I agree. I'm going to push back a little bit on that, but I agree in the micro sense, like for that person that's coming in who's almost given a false sense of inclusion. Yeah. But I think in a macro sense, it's also important for us to see the big story that progress is being made. If we look at just, and I don't remember where I saw this, but if we just look recently with how that segment of the church has looked and viewed at homosexuality, in that it was just a total taboo, I don't know, 50s, 60s or whatever. And then we move into a place where, you have, what do they call the Jesus movement, where a lot of people kind of influxed into the evangelical church. And then it moved into, well, how do we deal with homosexuality issue? And then it became an even more taboo with the 80s because of the AIDS scare and how that the gay community seemed to be a scapegoat for this idea of AIDS. And then you move into the 90s where we see now people who are heterosexual are having the AIDS epidemic is crossing over. And there was that movement in the church, hate the sinner, or not hate the sinner, but, hate the sin. Love the sinner.
Love the sinner, yeah.
And I think if we take that into account,
ministries.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that we're seeing a kind of, it feels like a digression, but I think that it's important for us to also see in the macro that that's kind of an important step if you're going to change someone's consciousness. Like they can't go from we're against this to the next day we're for it. There has to be some progress, and it's a little bit encouraging to see that there is some movement forward in those areas if we look at the bigger picture. And that doesn't change the individual micro picture of that person who, again, is given that false sense of inclusion. But I think it's important for us to acknowledge that there is progress. Like I feel like society, we are moving forward in the sense, like we don't have slavery. We're actually talking about these issues. And I even think, and we can have a whole discussion on this, but even the idea of political correctness is a move forward because it's this collective conscious effort to try to include people with our language, even though it's used on both sides for different ways. But I'm just saying that if we look at the big picture, I think that there is some encouragement there.
And so I think the reason there is progress is because this subject doesn't matter to people if it doesn't affect them.
Right.
Like if I didn't own a slave or have a slave trying to escape, I would just go along with whatever I read in the Bible, right? Until it actually impacted me and working through it. Oh, now I have a friend who is someone who is made in the image of God, my brother who's enslaved. Now I have to actually work through thinking about what I think about this and like reading the Bible and reading the whole context. Until that happens with any issue, until it impacts me personally or maybe someone I love, it's going to be something that I don't pursue. So the more our culture brings up this topic and brings it to the forefront and we start to engage ourselves or people that are close to us that are actually people and not just subjects, that's going to force the church to actually, and people of faith, to deal with this issue and to really do the hard ethical work of interpretation and thinking through how it applies. That hasn't been done historically because people who have been liberated and who see themselves as homosexuals have just not been included in the church whatsoever. So maybe it is a good thing that some evangelical churches are beginning to welcome people, even though they're obviously not where we think that they should be in relation to people of different sexualities and genders. It's tough to talk about this because my own personal history, you probably know, but I don't know if all of our listeners know, but I actually got fired from a job because of my views on homosexuality. So I had been hired by a private Christian school to teach the Bible after my seminary graduation. And I had trained and I developed curriculum and I went out with the staff. And I specifically went to this school because they didn't have anything in their belief doctrines about inerrancy. And if you've listened to our podcast in the past, you know I believe in evolution and I still love the Bible. I'm still very committed to the Bible, but that's what's led to me to look at things differently. And so I went to this school and was hired by them. And it came out just like a week before school started that I attended a church. A parent found out that I attended a church that is open to inclusion and ministers to the LGBTQ community. And the parent expressed concern that a Bible teacher on their staff would go to a church like that. And so they actually sat me down and asked me what I thought. And I told them, like, hey, look, I'm not homosexual, but I cannot say that homosexuality is a sin. After my studies of scripture, after my lifetime of being with people who have gone through the whole process, I had a close friend who was a Christian that was convinced homosexuality was a sin, but they were struggling with it. And like watching what that did to them. And then that caused me to dig even deeper into studying and thinking about this topic. I've arrived at the place where I don't believe the New Testament talks about homosexual relationships, just scholarly, in any sense, the New Testament's not addressing that topic. So I don't believe personally that it is a sin. And they said, well, what happens if it comes up in class? What will you say? And I said, hey, I've actually thought about that. If a student in junior high or high school comes up to me and says, hey, what do you think about homosexuality? My response would be to say, that is a very important topic. And that's a really good question. And you should definitely talk to your parents about that. And I told them that would be my response. I could teach on the Bible, but that would be my response about homosexuality. And I asked them, I was like, hey, how many times has this topic come up in school in the past 8 years? And the person was like, never. One of the other Bible teachers said that topic's actually never really come up. Not that that's like the best way to handle it or whatever. But anyway, it came to a point where they said, if you can agree homosexuality is a sin, you can stay on staff. And if you don't, you have to be let go.
Oh, no, you're trying to turn all the kids gay, Alan.
I know. And I told them, I was like, this is not central to my identity or theology necessarily, because it doesn't, hasn't always impacted me personally. But it's such a big issue for people that it divides.
Well, I applaud your courage in that, Alan, like being willing to lay your livelihood on the line for those beliefs. Like, that's really incredible. And I would say, and I know that you believe this because we've talked about this before, but there is also a huge divide between tolerating gay people and saying it's not a sin, and then going the extra step and saying, but no, I'm going to celebrate gay people.
I'm going to support you.
I'm going to support. I'm going to be an ally. I'm going to celebrate you. And for me, it has huge theological implications in a positive sense, because I don't have to believe in a God who would make people gay and condemn them to hell. And I'll tell a story about that in a sec. And I don't have to believe in God that would make creation perfect and then let all of creation fall and then consider all of nature to be fundamentally bad when animals, like many, 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 many species, exhibit homosexual sexuality. But instead, I can believe in a God who makes a wide range of ways to express love. That doesn't mean there's no boundaries. Like, for example, pedophilia, bestiality, those are, a lot of people think, they say, well, it's a slippery slope. If we accept gay people, then everyone's going to want to start marrying dolphins. That's what I mean to say is that God can make the ability to express sexuality in many different ways between two loving consensual adults, and that's part of God's design for the world fundamentally. Okay. And so I once in my former life, when I was really holding up the bastion of orthodoxy, I met a man on a plane. I think I was maybe 20, and he was really sweet. I think his name was John. And he told me that he was going to the gay games in Canada, and we started chatting. He was really nice. And he started telling me about being gay, and I told him I went to a conservative college, and we started chatting, and he was really nice to keep talking to me because I was started trying to witness to him, and he didn't really have to put up with that, but he's kept talking to me. And he actually told me that he went through shock therapy. He was from Australia. His parents put him through electric shock therapy to try to shock the gay out of him. I mean, we're talking like an insane amount of violence done to this person, among other things he told me. So we get to the end of the conversation. I think we talked for maybe 2 hours, and he said, he looked at me with these sad eyes and he said, "Now that you've talked to me, do you think I'm going to hell?" And I looked at him with so much compassion and regret, and I said, "Yes." And in that moment, something felt really amiss. I was like, I know I'm saying the right thing,
but it doesn't feel right.
But that means I had to believe in a God that would make this person gay. And even though this guy told me he wanted to not be gay because he wanted to have kids and a family. And he got really sad saying, well, I'm probably just, never going to have a family. And he said, if I could choose and do it all over again, I wouldn't be gay. I mean, I don't condone that for other people. I think people should be able to celebrate the fact that they're gay and gay families and sexuality. And I think gay people should be able to adopt children and get married and everything. But this particular person said that if he could choose, he would choose to be straight. But in that moment, I had to wrestle with the idea that I believed in a God who would make someone gay against their will and then send them to hell.
So to point out what your story and what my story are kind of showing is that for a lot of Christians who feel like they have to toe the line and they have to say homosexuality is a sin, this is actually a super painful thing. It hurts them as it is hurting people who are people who are gay. It excludes those people, but it breaks up relationships. I know people who are conservative Christians, and the people that I worked with at that school, they loved me and I loved them. And it hurt us that they had to toe the line for saying homosexuality is a sin. So that's another side of it that you don't necessarily talk about.
And some people I've heard today are saying things like, well, it's okay to be gay if God made you that way or whatever, but you should be celibate. What do you guys think about that one?
Oh, the washed and waiting or something like that? There's a movement about that.
What's it called?
I think it's called washed and waiting. Jeff, do you know what I'm talking about?
I didn't know there was a term for it. I've never heard that term before.
Okay. There's like it
sounds like a spa or a group.
It sounds like a car.
Not to belittle people, but I personally watched. I saw how that impacted someone on a personal level and how destructive that can be in someone's life, and how freeing coming out of that was, and not having to like subject yourself to that sort of experience. So I'm all for people doing whatever they want with their sexuality and deciding to stay celibate. If you can make the decision to stay celibate, that's awesome. But kind of pressuring people socially to do that is like super destructive. Physically, it is physically destructive to a human being to tell them like you have to remain celibate for the rest of your life because you're attracted to men or because you're attracted to women.
Yeah, and there's still the underlining idea under that there's something fundamentally wrong with you. And I know this isn't, I mean, we all kind of have our stories, and I could, in youth ministry, obviously purity and sexuality is always an issue that you talked about. I can go around and around about some of the dumb things that I did and were a part of, even difficult times where I had youth leaders that we both at the time were homosexuality is wrong. We need to work this out. And this, a particular youth leader that I had on my staff at that point had dealt with his homosexuality in the sense that he at the time believed it was sin and was working through it, and someone had found out that was part of his testimony or part of his past at the time, and it became this huge deal. It didn't ruin him, because if you knew this guy, he is amazing.
He's awesome, and
he's really embraced who he is, his sexuality, everything that encompasses who he is, and he's just one of my favorite people in the entire world. Anyway. But at the time, like, this almost broke him, something that he held very dear and still does, his faith and everything that he believed. And that someone would, just because his sexuality was an issue in the past at that time, almost ruined his ability to really affect people in a good way and connect with them. And I just...
It destroyed his relationship with the church.
It did.
For sure.
And one of the things that through this that really started to impress upon me, which was actually a big catalyst for me to be where I am today, was this idea of natural. Like, well, that's not natural. Nature doesn't do this. And that really stuck with me, because shortly after this incident, my wife and I had been trying to have children for a very long time. And I know this isn't totally related, but it is at the heart of it. And our twins were born after we had been married for 15 years, not for lack of trying. after 15 years, I mean, you look at that and it wasn't a conscious decision that we're like, we'll wait till year 15 before we have children. It was because there were things that were fundamentally wrong with our quote unquote natural processes. We couldn't have kids. Shortly after this incident with the youth leader, we got pregnant, which was a 1 in a million shot, if we're honest. Like it shouldn't have happened with all the issues that we were having. And then shortly after miscarried. Obviously it was devastating for both of us, but even more so for my wife when, you expose this idea of what nature is and how God can work. And when you feel as though there's something fundamentally wrong with your nature, like your physical being, it's very difficult. And I can't imagine how much more for someone who's a homosexual within the church that is trying to deny that part of themselves. Because don't get me wrong, I do believe that there are unhealthy expressions of sexuality, but we're not talking about that here. We're talking about someone who, this is who they are. This is what they're trying to figure out how to express, a vital part of what we are as humans and our sexuality. And to be told that you're not natural or there's something wrong fundamentally with who you are is very debilitating. You can't, I don't even know how to fully verbalize. And obviously I'm speaking from my perspective, only from the outside, and seeing my wife walk through this place where she feels like the very rhetoric and quote unquote purpose of her sexuality, she cannot reach that, by some people's perspective, that ultimate goal of childbirth, and to know that someone whose homosexuality within a given context, that they're told explicitly or even by the rhetoric itself that you can't attain the ultimate goal of a family and a marriage. I mean, at the very least in that situation, we had each other. We had a marriage that was, quote unquote approved by God, that we could rely on. But to take that away, that was the only thing that brought us through this idea of feeling like there was something. Because honestly, medically, there wasn't just something wrong with Catherine. It was me too. It was this unfortunate series of events that just debilitated us. And fortunately, it worked out for us. But I'm not naive enough to know that it doesn't work out for everyone. We were lucky, blessed, whatever you want to call it. But it still doesn't take away that idea. And I think that when we speak in people of terms of agenda, and we speak about people in terms of this black and white disconnected from their story and stories about people like them, then we do them and ourselves and our whole community and nation and whatever a disservice, because we are speaking from ignorance. We may be speaking from intellectual knowledge about, well, this is how it works psychologically, and this is how it works from the Bible, blah, 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 but we're still speaking at ignorance from people's real experiences. And to me, that seems to be what it all points to, and what is the most important.
Well said.
That's really, thank you for sharing that, Jeff. Like, that's something very close to your heart. And I think that, it is absolutely one thing to say, you know what, my own personal conscience is telling me that this is the best way to live. If you want to be celibate or whatever, if you choose not to exhibit your sexuality in one way or another, but to tell other people that they are fundamentally wrong or flawed in some fashion, it breaks my heart, and I felt a little bit of that, just this idea that sex should only be within marriage. And I think that's why gay marriage is so threatening to people, because it seemed to condone gay sexuality and make a space for it as being okay in some fashion, and it's interesting to me because so I'm divorced, and to a lot of people would think that as a divorced woman, I should be completely celibate. And I was taught that growing up, that celibacy, if I wasn't celibate, I would be in a lot of pain, and that I would be really miserable, and that I would be disobeying God's law. And that, there's a lot of fear rhetoric around like having sex outside of marriage. In general, if you're gay or straight at all, like if you're not pure, you are not living according to God's plan for you, and that you are fundamentally sinful and sinning. But on this side of things, having dated like an adult in the real world and not being celibate, I'm like, this is nice over here. I mean, that's also very personal. But what I mean to say is that there are bad forms of sexuality when sexuality is not loving and when it is dominating and takes advantage of people and commits violence. But we're not talking about that. Like you said, Jeff, we are talking about sexuality that is coming from an utter place of love. And when it's coming from an utter place of love, it has to know God. That's what I think. Like where God is, where their love is, like God is love, And I think a lot of people are incredibly upset by that idea. So an argument based on nature or based on purity or based on marriage customs or laws or covenants, all of that, when you start to consider the individual instances of people being in love and expressing their love and doing right by each other and not harming each other, I think that stuff starts to fall apart at a point, for me at least.
Yeah. And I would say, even in terms of, quote unquote, the biblical argument, I would say that the only consistent sexual ethic would be fidelity. This idea that whatever your expression is, because obviously even forms of marriage, even forms of practical forms of fidelity and how that looks has changed throughout scripture and throughout history. But that center focus of, are you doing what's best for the other person? And is that other person doing what's best for you? Is this creating what we would say unconditional love? Is this something that is creating something good and worthy and abundant? Then I think that should be our guide.
And safe.
Yes, exactly.
And safe, yeah. And I think we've all met people who are married and freaking miserable and are mean as hell to each other and should not be together, And we've all met people who are not married and have amazingly healthy relationships. So I think if we focus on an ethic of health, kind of like you're saying, Jeff, that should be the crucial point. And that's what religion and faith should offer us, is to teach us what health looks like, what unconditional love looks like. Not rules.
I think someone can actually push back against your guys's definition.
Are you going to play devil's advocate?
No. I'm just saying, I think someone can listen to what you just said and say, there's something more than just human health at stake. There's divine revelation and stuff like that. And I think there's room to disagree about how all of this is applied. You can disagree with what you guys just said and still looking at homosexuality in the Bible and how the Bible talks about sex. You can come to different places where you can say, hey, I know people who say sex and marriage is the only place where it should happen. But those people are still committed to supporting homosexual marriage, gay marriage, because they recognize that the Bible wasn't necessarily talking about it. That you can look at the sexual ethics of the Bible and recognize that it wasn't speaking to stuff that we know now. All I'm trying to say is there's room for disagreement, but all of us, because of these personal encounters we have with people who are gay, we are responsible for looking at what we believe, especially if we're going to vote and say and push it on other people, and really dig in and discover what exactly we believe and what exactly our text is talking about before we even push it on someone else. So I just want to say that.
To me, the civic issue should not be a point of contention. A lot of people claim that Christianity made up marriage and owns it somehow. And I think to ban, in a religiously free country, to ban marriage between certain types of consenting adults because your religious tradition says it's wrong is completely antithetical to democracy. I just have to say. I really don't think it should be an argument.
That's also judging people outside of forcing other people to be Christians is something that Christians are not into in the New Testament, right? Jesus said, don't judge.
Well, Paul's pretty explicit too. Paul says, don't judge anyone else outside of your own community. That's not your job. That's God's job. Only God can judge me, kind of thing. And it's,
Tupac.
Well, and I don't know, Alan, what you're saying about marriage, I kind of want to disagree. I want to push back against you pushing back. Seriously, because up until pretty recently, it was completely legal to rape your wife in marriage. As long as it's in the marriage bed, it's, I think these notions of property are so deeply entrenched in the institution of marriage that a lot of people are becoming so disillusioned with the institution of marriage and how it's been historically passed down to us that a lot of people, especially young people in metro centers, are starting to be non-monogamous, and they can find, I don't know, maybe not everyone can do this, but I think if you can find a sexual ethic or you can be polygamous and still be loving and still be safe and take care of those around you and take care of yourself, then I don't know who we are to say that those people are sinning because they're not married. You know what I mean?
But my point was that these are different topics, that you can evaluate what you believe about homosexuality without retooling everything you believe about even gender or sexuality. That's my point, is that because people's beliefs are based on these 3 verses in the New Testament, they can deal with those without having to move past marriage or move past other sexual ethics. I'm just saying those are two different issues. That's all. You know what I mean? We can all agree on that without agreeing on.
I don't think they're different issues. I think people should be allowed to express their sexuality in love with whoever consents with them, as long as they're not hurting anybody. And that goes for all forms of sexuality.
But even if someone disagrees with you, they can still evaluate what they believe about homosexuality. Does that make sense?
You can disagree with me about anything you want.
And you, our listeners, can disagree with us about anything you want. I think that'll close out our conversation this week. I think that we do have, obviously, we've kind of opened up Pandora's box. There's so many issues connected to this and things that we can talk about. So we do want to hear from you. So if you have anything to add to our conversation for this week, you can comment on the show notes at irenicast.com/13. That's /13. There you can also find informational links on some of the stuff that we've talked about to go a little deeper on the topic. And then also don't forget to interact with us on Facebook. We'll have our question of the week this week on Facebook that you can answer and reply to. Next week, we're going to have an interview that's with a gay couple from my church, Jim and Richard, that'll kind of give us a personal look at some of these issues that we've talked about. And in particular, there's a really good story about them and how they feel about this idea of tolerance. Someone saying like, well, you can be gay, but we're not going to publicly affirm that. We're just going to, we'll just keep it under wraps, and how that affects the real person. So I'm really excited about next week's interview. So we hope you enjoy it. On the other side of the music, we are bringing back Jesus or Jay-Z. This week, we are bringing back Jesus or Jay-Z. There hasn't been a lot of clamoring for it, but we'll do it anyway.
I love it.
I do. This is my favorite segment, if I'm honest. I don't know. I like it a lot. So if you are a new listener, this is the segment we did for our very first episode. And we have each come up with a song lyric, 2 song lyrics each. And the other hosts have to guess whether it is a Christian song or whether it is a secular song. And this is kind of playing off the idea that some worship songs sound kind of dirty. And how some other songs, so sometimes it's hard to tell if you take the lyrics out of context what exactly is being talked about. So we're going to play off that idea, and we're going to get started. So, Alan, how about you start us off?
All right, I'll start. That works for me. Here we go. This is the chorus of a song. I want to heal. I want to feel what I thought was never real. I want to let go of the pain I felt so long. I want to heal. I want to feel like I'm close to something real. I want to find something I've wanted all along.
Wait, so we're guessing
We're guessing whether
this is a worship song
or whether
I'm
it's
gonna sing worship song.
Hey, if you could
It's
pick
just
the
so
artist,
vague.
you win. You win the game.
Okay.
If you pick
it's just
the
so
artist.
vague. I think worship song probably.
just from the game standpoint, I'm going to say, because it sounds so much like a religious song, I'm going to say it is a secular song.
Okay. It is actually a secular song.
Boom.
It is by Linkin Park, Somewhere I Belong.
Linkin Park. Please tell me you don't listen to them.
You and your screamo.
Okay.
No, they're not screamo.
Screamo.
I listen to
They're
Linkin
not
Park.
screamo?
Like,
Don't throw around the word screamo. That's
Is that sacred
How
to
dare
you?
you.
I'm so
How dare
sorry.
you.
no, it's
If you're
like
religious.
you've offended my musical taste because I'm a big metal fan, and to
You
say
like screamo.
no,
I
it's
got-
not screamo. You can't say screamo and metal are the same thing. Screamo is something
Well,
horrible and different.
It sounded like I offended you, and I'm trying to figure out how.
Because you just threw out the term screamo because it's a little heavier and someone
But you
yells.
said you didn't like it.
I don't like screamo, but you can't just classify every type of music like that as screamo. Like metal is not screamo. There's good
I was trying
screaming
to make
music.
fun of Alan.
How dare you fit stuff into your own
We're not supposed to
categories?
we can make fun of Linkin Park.
Okay.
That's fine because they're not
Hey,
good.
to be clear, I listened to Linkin Park in 9th grade. Okay.
Well, everyone
I just
did in ninth
went-
grade, right?
All right, I'll go next.
You should.
All right. I'm going to sing songs of loving and forgiving, songs of eating and of drinking, songs of living, songs of calling in the night, because songs are like a bolt of light and love's the only love you should invite.
I'm gonna say secular.
I am too. Sounds like Jason Mraz.
Really?
Sounds like something he'd write.
I was thinking
no.
it's so pagan.
It is secular. Yeah.
Yay.
It's a song called Take Me to Church by Sinead O'Connor and spelled Sinead.
I know that.
Okay. Yeah. I did
S-I-N-
not know.
Yeah, her name is Sinead. Her or there.
I've heard that song quite a bit, but I didn't know that verse.
Oh, this song is so good. So the chorus says, takes me to church. I've done so many bad things that hurts. Take me to church, but not the ones that her because that ain't the truth and that's not what it's worth. And she's a big LGBTQ advocate.
I would push back
she's
up
actually,
against that a little bit. I would say that is a Christian religious song. Because she is very like her album. One of her albums is called Theology, and I think she's a very important Christian voice for a lot of people within Christianity. I love her. I think she's
Catholic.
Fantastic. Yeah,
I think she went on SNL and ripped up a picture of the Pope in protest. I mean, she's a bold person.
I think unfortunately she has a lot of stigma left over from her run in the 90s, but I think she's brilliant. So I would say
she is brilliant. Okay, so it is a Christian song.
Yes, I would say that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. Christian song written by a secular artist. I'll give you that.
There you go.
Technicality.
Yeah.
We're bringing nuance to the game.
There we go.
All right. Okay, and to move completely away from nuance, here we go. My first one is. You ready for it?
Mm.
All right. I want to be locked.
Is that the song?
No. Oh my goodness.
Alan, the way this works is that someone talks and you don't talk.
You got it.
Seems to be an ongoing theme. All right. Anyway.
I think so.
Okay. You ready? You ready for the lyrics? I want to be locked in a cage. I want to be strapped in a chair. I want to be where you are. If my insanity comes wrapped up inside of you.
Ew, this is yucky. How do you even find songs like this?
It's got to be a Christian song because I don't think you would say it if it wasn't.
No, there is no way this is a Christian song. Like no religious person in their right mind said, I want to be strapped to a chair. I'm going to say non-Christian.
Alan, you are incorrect. In fact, this is a lyric from a band that I believe you are a kind of a fan of.
Linkin Park.
In the day.
This is from the Christian Linkin Park, Skillet.
Oh my gosh.
It's from their second album when they went like all industrial rock. It's called Locked in a Cage. And the album title is Hey You, I Love Your Soul. Very light and airy. And then I want to be locked in a cage, strapped in a chair.
Okay, I did listen to Skillet back in the day a lot.
So did I. I listened to they're good musicians, you know. Female drummer, very cool. She jumps very high, or did.
But they like strap themselves into chairs and stuff, so that is a little bit weird.
That's kind of a weird lyric, right? Like,
can you guys explain Christian hardcore and metal to me in general? Because I don't understand. Like, I don't know. So much of Christian language is so flowery. I guess. Okay, so I'm talking myself out of this as I'm saying it because, like, a literature, right? Like Ezekiel, you know. But I don't know. Christian metal is like death and destruction.
Well,
I don't know. I never understood it.
That's assuming that the feel of the music is reflecting the lyrics. Like, I think it's kind of, you know what I mean? Like, I'm a big metal fan, and I think a lot of the best quote unquote Christian metal bands, they never really were Christian bands signed with Christian labels. They're just really good bands that have really cool things to say, and they say it in a medium that feels aggressive, but doesn't necessarily have to be.
Yeah, I got it. All right, I got another one. I can hear the morning birds light upon the branches, and each in turn sing all of God's praises without words.
I'm going to say it's a Christian song.
I'm going to say it is not a Christian song.
Jeff wins. It is by Ray LaMontagne.
Oh, no.
I don't think I know who that is.
Without words. Oh, my God. Look him up immediately.
He's not a Christian, though, so I'm not going to
No. He's like Blue-Eyed Soul.
You guys probably burned your CDs back in the day, huh? I bet you both of you at one point broke a non-Christian CD because you wanted to be faithful.
I facilitated burning CD events. So
my friend Sarah and I, we went to like a Christian camp and we came home and we decided to get rid of our secular music. I didn't have any because I was already like a super.
That's so funny. You came home and you didn't have any.
I didn't have any. Did not.
You're like, I'm gonna go buy a CD so I can smash with a hammer.
I think one time I found an old superstitious album, very like who sings very superstitious?
Stevie Wonder.
Stevie Wonder.
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking Stevie Nicks. I knew that wasn't true, but I found a Stevie Wonder album that my mom had, and I listened to it, and I was like, "This guy's making fun of Christianity." I was like, "Mom, why do you have this?" I was like, "You should get rid of it."
That's awesome. All right, here we go. This is the chorus, and I know it's very like ambiguous, but it is what it is. You got one word. We're gonna party. We're gonna party. I can feel it down inside. We're gonna party.
Is that the lyrics to that Friday song?
No, that's the whole song. The whole song, over
that's
and
the
over
song
and
I
over.
drink after I have my coffee in the morning. I go to the bathroom.
I'm going to say secular, non-Christian.
I'm going to say Christian. Yeah.
You guys are going to be so sad. Do you know who sang this? It's Chris Tomlin. So it is a Christian song.
Oh, boy.
Oh, my gosh. I know this song. Now that you say that, I remember. Oh.
I'm good.
We're going to party, Jeff.
I can't believe I didn't get that because I remember hating that song the first time I heard it. Oh,
so great.
Yeah.
I lost track. Who's
Jeff,
gone?
you're up.
Am I up? Is this the last
Yeah.
one? Okay. Everyone else is done too?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, anyway, it says, I've been defeated and brought down, dropped to my knees when hope ran out. The time has come to change my ways.
I know who sings this.
Who is it, Alan? I'll say secular, but go ahead.
Yeah. It's Alter Bridge, right?
Yes.
Alter
I picked it
Bridge.
because the
Good
lyrics the lyrics are ambiguous, but I just wanted to say the title.
So-
Do you know the title of the song, Alan?
Daybreak or something?
No, it's Metalingus.
Oh.
Get it?
So appropriate.
Right? Appropriate to the
For our
sexuality thing. There you
episode.
go. That's fun.
Sex.
I don't know why they called it that because it has nothing to do with any of that.
They're making love to their guitars. That's what it is.
It's got a pretty
You're
sick.
listening to
Like the guitars are pretty phallic. I'm not gonna lie.
Mhm.
Screamo's also phallic if you listen to it closely.
You're phallic.
I feel like this is devolving.
It absolutely is.
Okay.
All right. I think
it's time to call it
yeah,
a day.
that'll do it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for checking out the show. And if you enjoy what you hear and you are entertained by our musings, then go to iTunes and Stitcher and rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Your ratings and reviews really help the show and make it much easier for people to find us. So we really appreciate those. Contact us anytime with your questions and feedback. You can follow us on Twitter or you can check out our Google Plus page. And you can email the podcast at podcast/Irenicast. And then again, you can leave a voice message for the show at irenicast.com/feedback. And who knows, your recording may even make the show one day. So for this week, I'm Jeff.
I'm Alan.
Dang it. And I'm Alan too. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for joining the conversation.